JSP
JSP servlets as well as your EJP concept actually. Okay. So before your Spring Boot occurs, okay, before your Spring Boot is developed actually, so we have your Spring framework actually. And before your Spring framework is developed, we have your traditional approach, J2W traditional approach, well, which is your JSP servlets as well as your EJP concept actually. Okay, JSP servlet as well as your EJP concept actually. So in order to understand the famous of your Spring framework, we have to go to the year 2000 actually. In this time, if I want to create any project in J2W, okay, if I want to create any project in J2W, we always uses your J2W components like your JSP servlets as well as your EJP components we are using actually. And at that time, EJP is one of a famous technology you can able to say at that time, before your Spring have occurred, at that time, you can able to say EJP is one of the famous technology, and it is provided with many features like messaging, lookup for the entities like that. It will be provided with so many features it was provided actually. But the only problem with that EJP, it is very difficult to manage them actually, because in EJP, we have 3 types of beans are available: session bean, entity bean, as well as your message driven bean actually. And in the case of entity bean, what we can do? What is the purpose of your entity bean? Yeah.
Map with the database table.
It is mainly used for storing inside the databases actually. Okay. So since we are going to work with an entity, it becomes a heavy object actually. Okay, it becomes a heavy object. So that's where the people comes into a concept called as your framework actually. That is your Spring framework actually. And whenever you develop any Spring framework, we'll be always developing one program. We'll be developing what program we'll develop?
Bean program.
Bean program. Or that Bean program is otherwise called as what?
Pojo.
Pojo section. Okay. So whatever the feature that is present in the case of your EJP concept, those feature I can able to achieve in the case of your Spring framework just with a single program called as
Pojo or Bean program.
Pojo class or a Bean class. Pojo class or a Bean class. So in the year 2000, okay, and in the year 2000, if I want to develop any J2W based application, normally we'll be going for this JSP servlets and EJP only. So at that time, EJP is one of the most popular technology you can able to say, and it was provided with so many features like under messaging, lookup, and for the entities like that, it was provided so many features. But since even though I'm going to use my entities and all, it becomes a heavy object actually. So for that purpose, only we have introduced a framework called as your Spring framework. And what is an advantage of using the Spring framework now? Whatever the feature that is present in the case of EJP, I can do in my Spring framework just with a simple
Bean program
or a Pojo class. Okay, just with a simple Bean program or a Pojo class actually. And how I can able to do it? The Spring framework is provided with one important feature called as what feature?
Dependency injection.
Okay. So with the help of this dependency injection, wherever I want to inject it, I can able to inject the values at which time I can able to inject it.
runtime.
And where I can able to do this injection and all in a separate
XML file.
And another advantage of using your Spring framework is that the Spring framework can also integrate with other frameworks also. You can able to integrate like Hibernate structs also. I can able to integrate with your Spring framework. So the Spring framework becomes more popular after your EJP components actually, because it provided with a very important feature called as your dependency injection. And if I want to write any cross-cutting functionality in a single place, and if I want to use in other program now, what feature my Spring provides?
Spring AOP.
AOP concept, aspect-oriented programming actually. It was provided with your AOP concept also. So and this Spring can also integrate it with other frameworks also. It can be integrated and like Hibernate as well as your structs also. It can be integrated. But whenever we talk about the Spring, so Spring is a framework. And as you already told now, what I have to do if it is a framework now?
Persisting field.
No. If it is a framework means what I have to do?
Download jar files.
Separate jar files actually. Okay, download all the jar files. So one of the problem with the Spring framework is that whenever we are going to build any large application in the case of your Spring framework, we need more jar files are needed actually. Okay, we need more jar files are needed actually. But here, instead of using jar file, what we are using actually?
Form.xml file.
Where the form.xml is present. Even if I use my form.xml also, in my form.xml I have to provide so many
Dependencies.
Yes, I have to provide so many dependencies. I have to provide it actually. So whenever you're going to build any larger application in the case of your Spring framework, we need more jar files are needed, and the external configurations, and we have to create a separate XML file. And whenever you create any Bean program, that Bean program should be configured in XML file actually. So we have to write so many external configuration. I have to do it actually. But as a developer, if I'm going to develop any project now, as a developer, I need to focus only on the coding part actually. I should not sit and download the jar files, or I should not do all the external configuration and all. That is one problem with the help of which framework?
Spring
framework actually. Yes, Spring framework is also one of a successful framework only you can say. But the problem is that as a developer, we need to focus only on the coding part actually, rather than sitting and downloading the jar file and doing all your external configuration actually. So for that purpose only, we have introduced a concept called as
Spring Boot.
Spring Boot.
Spring Boot.
Spring Boot framework. Okay, we have to use a concept called as your Spring Boot framework actually. And you should and you can able to say the Spring Boot is not a replacement of your Spring framework. It is not a replacement of your Spring framework. In the Spring Boot also we are going to use the same thing that is present in the case of your Spring framework only. But what is only one advantage is now in the case of your Spring Boot we don't need to download any.
Jar
Jar
file.
file.
Or there is no need to do any external configuration at all. So it will be giving a production ready project. It will be giving. So as a developer, we have to write only the
Coding part.
coding part only. You have to write it. Your Spring Boot will be giving a production ready application, a project. It will be giving with all the necessary informations. It will be giving actually. So as a developer, I have to directly write only the code. Okay, as a developer, you have to write only the code actually. So for that purpose, only you will be going for your Spring Boot concept actually. So as I already told before, and if, in earlier days and all, if I want to develop any J2W application, means we always go for a concept called
Spring Boot.
Spring Boot.
Guys, listen to my questions properly. In earlier days, asking. In earlier days, if I develop any application, you have to go for
J2W components.
J2W components like what?
EJB.
Servlet concept actually. But whenever you talk about this EJP is also one of a popular technology at that time actually. But it provided so many features like messaging, lookup for the entity and all. But since we are using your entity, it becomes your heavy object. It will be becoming. And even if I want to insert a single roller, we have to write so many code. We have to write it actually. So for that purpose, one day, we have introduced a concept called as your
Spring Framework.
Spring Framework.
What is the Spring Framework now? And whatever the feature that is present in the case of your EJP, I can able to do in my Spring Framework just with a single class called as
Bean class.
Bean
class.
class or a bean class actually. Yeah, and the Spring Framework provides a very important feature called as your dependency injection, AOP concept like that. It was provided with very important feature, and we can able to integrate your Spring Framework with other frameworks like Hibernate as well as your Struts and all. Yes, the Spring Framework is also a more successful framework only. But the problem with the Spring Framework is that we have to download so many
Jar
Jar
file.
file.
and I provide so many external configuration if I'm going to develop any large application I'm going to develop. So as a developer, I need to focus only on the logic or on the coding part actually, rather than sitting and downloading all the jar file and doing all your external configuration. So for that purpose, only we have introduced a framework called as
Spring Boot.
Spring Boot framework.
actually. So again, Spring Boot is not a replacement of your Spring framework. Whatever we are going to do in the case of Spring, the same thing only we are going to do in the case of your Spring Boot. But what is an advantage of Spring Boot? A production ready application. Okay, it is going to provide a production ready application. So as a developer, we are going to focus only on the
Writing coding part.
Coding part.
as a developer, we are going to focus only on the coding part. We are going to focus it. We are not going to download any jar file, and we are not going to what is